Welcome back, everybody, to the Calaveria podcast, your one-stop shop for all things supernatural. I'm your host, Jose.
And I'm your host, Samantha.
And that's right, everybody. We are back with a brand new episode. And for this episode, we are going back to our roots, right? Just like our very first episode, we are doing another stories episode. And just as always, I will be telling allegedly true paranormal tales from Reddit.
This time, unlike always, I guess, I'm going to be telling stories that are actually true that come from my roommate and her family. But first, we do have some corrections from the last episode. I know I had originally said that Tony Pickman showed the drawing to his daughter. I'm not too sure if they actually had a daughter or not, so if that's wrong information, I'm sorry. Do you have any corrections?
I do. It's not really a story-wise one. It's just like a little thing. I know when I was trying to relate, I guess, to the story about Sally getting her appendix removed, I mentioned that I had gotten mine, and I said that I still have the stitches. Obviously, I still don't have the stitches because I got it like when I was 7 years old. So yeah, I mean that's just like a little mix up there. But other than that, I think that's all for our corrections. And so now let's jump into the stories. I gave birth to my angel baby at 26 weeks, almost 2 weeks ago. But during the birth, this happened, and I can't stop thinking about it. I don't know if this is normal or not, but I decided to take it here to see if anyone else had it. During the labor, I wasn't on any high drugs, just morphine alongside gas and air, which shouldn't make anyone delirious. I know this because I had the same with my daughter 3 years prior, and I was fine. Towards the end, before I pushed him out and pain was getting intense, a young man in a white shirt, blue jeans, and dark hair came into the room. I turned away from the door to my fiancé, but he walked over and stood beside him. I then obviously asked the midwife and him, "Can you ask him to leave, as I just want us in the room?" Their two responses being, "No one else is in here." But he was. He was standing right there. I saw his face, who I didn't recognize. I remember exactly what he was wearing, and he just stared at me for a solid minute or so before leaving. Shortly after that, I delivered my son. The direction he walked in was towards the room they take the baby to get checks, dressed, and look better, obviously considering the circumstances. But this man definitely went to the room where my son was going. I am writing this because today I seen a TikTok of a lady during an emergency C-section go through something similar, with it being her dad that passed in 2008. But this man, I don't know still who it was. Describing it again to my fiancé, he's certain it could have been his grandfather who passed young from being murdered, but we're still so unsure. Am I even crazy for thinking it was a spirit coming to guide my son to a safer place? Could it have been my son's soul of how he was going to look? I honestly don't know, and it hasn't left my mind at all. Update. I asked my fiancé to ask my mother-in-law for a picture of the grandfather. It's a grainy picture, but the man and him are very similar. She's gonna look for more for me. I described to her all that happened, since she said that she also had a dream about him, and she also mentioned he always did wear a white button-up, apart from when he was working. If I get more, I'll see if it's him. So far, I'm really thinking it was the soul of my boy, but him and his grandfather would have looked really alike if it was just my son's soul. So Samantha, what do you think about that story?
Honestly, it really does sound like it's the soul of the grandpa kind of just like meeting their grandchild for the first time, or just wanting to like protect them, I guess, as they enter this new world. Because I mean, like, I'm not sure, like, it's not like a harmful spirit or anything, and I just find it a little interesting. And I understand why maybe like the poster thinks that this could be the soul of like their child, because they were the only ones that could see them. Why would they see someone else's grandpa and everything like that? Like, that would kind of not make sense. But I feel like it's most likely is like the grandfather, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I see. I honestly, I'm kind of like torn as to maybe if it's the son's future spirit or the grandfather, the spirit of the grandfather. But I do agree, whatever it is, I mean, it didn't seem like it was harmful because nothing happened. It didn't do anything to her or the baby. And it does seem like maybe it could have been the spirit of the grandfather, considering like the circumstances of how he passed and then going after like the baby. So it could just be something that like, hey, he didn't get to see this grandchild. He didn't get to live long enough for that. And so he's obviously seeing him in the afterlife and just caring for him. So I really don't know. I do think it's interesting though how she mentioned it potentially maybe being her son's spirit, which I never really have heard of that. So
Me either.
that's an interesting take on that. And that was when giving birth to my stillborn/premature son, I seen someone else in the room who wasn't there. By user small_Shiba. This happened in northeastern Oklahoma, within the Cherokee Reservation around 2008 in the beginning of fall. Myself and 8 of my other friends that I went to school with had all met up at a friend's house to hang out for the night around a campfire and listen to music. We were all about 15 to 16 years old. My friend had a trail that went maybe over a quarter of a mile into the woods where it led to an open circle in the wooded area. There was a fire pit there with a single tree and another trail that led south from the opening where we would be hanging out for the night. We sat around doing this and that, bullshitting into the night, and may I remind you, we were not partying. No booze, no smoke, no nothing. Just 9 of us out in the woods having a good time. It's around 2:30 or 3, and things changed. We are all up having a good time, and my friend John gets up and heads to the entrance of that south trail at the edge of the cut to go pee. I just so happened to look up from the fire and turn to look at him, and up in front of him, in the trail, is this gray figure that stood in front of him, about 20 yards away. I asked him quietly if he saw that, and he looks up and comes back to the fire with the rest of us. My eyes are locked on this figure standing in the dark, this thing standing about 7 feet tall with a static, cloudy look to it. Its legs started where the bottom of one's chest plate would be, long, lanky arms, which laid down almost to where its knees would be, with black hollow eyes with no nose or no mouth. All 9 of us are staring at this thing and no one can move. Some started to cry, some kept their heads down, but I kept my eyes right on it, looking at this thing while it stood there looking right back at us. It moved horizontally to the right, into the woods off the south trail, slowly moving around. It got to a part of the woods that during the day you would see a 7-foot rock wall. When it approached that, it hovered over the wall with no struggle at all, and then slowly backed off into the darkness of the woods. We stayed there till the sun came up, and then we got out of there. We never talked about that until about 15 years after. Some of them became my best friends, and they can recall that night just as I did in this post. I went to that spot a few times after that night and never saw anything. Looking back, did we really see something? Or was this a case of mass hysteria? I can still see it in my mind, clear as day. I don't know what would happen if I ever saw it again.
That's creepy. Like the fact that some of them started like to cry and like just their reaction to like this just random figure thing out there. Like it kind of sounds like a case of mass hysteria, but I feel like it isn't. I feel like if it was, like they definitely have gaslighted themselves, I guess, a little bit to be like that didn't happen.
In all honesty, I don't know where I stand on mass hysteria. I mean, I really don't know. I'm not gonna act like I know exactly. I know what it is, right? I'm not gonna act like I've done my research about it though to see if it's like 100% scientific fact that this happens or whatever the case may be. But to me, I just find it very hard to believe that you can have a group of people, in this case 9 people, 15 to 16 years old. You're not a little kid. You're self-aware, obviously. You know Like he says, they weren't drinking, they weren't smoking, they weren't doing anything. They were just hanging out, hanging out, having a good time, probably telling jokes or whatever whatever the case may be. So for them to like all remember and say the same thing, I feel like they obviously saw something. I cannot sit here and tell you like, okay, they all made that up or they're all, just delusional or whatever. I don't know. The whole idea of a group of people just conjuring up this same thing or experiences the same thing that didn't happen just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't sit right with me, because if I were to experience something, and I mean, let's just say, for example, that whole incident I had with the rake, which is like another gray being thing. I've told people that and they just look at me like I'm crazy or they don't believe me. So I know how it feels. And to just think like, you saw something and somebody's just trying to like invalidate that and they think like you're being funny or whatever the case may be, it messes with you. Like, you're just like the boy who cried wolf, right? That sort of thing. Like, nobody believes me.
You definitely start to second guess yourself.
Exactly. So I would say, I mean, I don't know what they saw, but I do think they saw something because they all remember it. He says that they went like 15 years without talking about it. And I feel like stuff like that happens when people go through like traumatizing events or just like stuff that just literally leaves them like second guessing what they may have saw. And that was The Gray in the Night, true story that happened to me and some friends, by user KAL_Bunga. Not at all familiar with the supernatural, if this is indeed what we may be dealing with, which is the explanation that we're leaning towards. So this started when my boyfriend was over yesterday. He had picked me up from work and I went to shower. I was drying off when he opened the door and handed me my underwear. I told him that I appreciated the gesture, but I had underwear in the bathroom already. He also jokingly snapped at me with, "You freaking called me from downstairs to bring you these. You better take them, woman." I assumed he was joking, so I just took the panties from him and told him to go back downstairs. Didn't think much of it. Next thing that happened was a couple of hours later. My roommate was getting ready to leave for a date with one of her friends when I heard her calling me from the bedroom to help her zip up her dress. I trotted over to her bedroom to find nobody there. Not only that, but when I saw her leaving the bathroom, she was wearing jeans and a tank top, nothing that I had to zip. I told her that I heard her voice coming from the bedroom and she just looked confused. She went in and looked around. Her TV was off. Her computer was off. There was just nothing in the room. The next bit came around 11 p.m. My boyfriend and I had been watching Netflix and I had a craving for ice cream. So we drove to go get ice cream. After ice cream, we sat and watched an acoustic show for about an hour before heading home. When we got home, we went into the bedroom and fell asleep watching TV. We woke up around 7 a.m. when he had to leave for work. My roommate was already up and made a joke that we must have really been going at it the way you were shrieking last night. I didn't know what she was talking about. When we were alone, we discussed what was happening. I was initially the one to draw the strange conclusion based on what was happening. The underwear thing, the dress thing, and the shrieking thing. She's a big believer in this kind of stuff, so she seemed open to the fact. The last bit of weirdness came when we were doing our evening meditation, and we could hear speaking from the hallway. It was between two people. We broke concentration and listened. I'm not dumb, so I considered it was an intruder. Then clear as day, through the door we hear, "Night, y'all," and a high-pitched giggle. Both of those things are what my roommate does and says when she passes my room and I'm with my boyfriend at night. We lit some sage throughout the house while saying a prayer. I'm not sure if that'll do any good. We also want to have the house tested for carbon monoxide and mold. And it's totally cool if you read this and don't buy into it, because I'm not like 100% sure that I do either. Edit. No carbon monoxide detected in the home. Relieved? Question mark. As of right now, we haven't experienced any other phenomenon that we've taken note of, but we are still very much on high alert. So, this mimic story, what are your thoughts?
I think it's honestly like I've heard of mimics and kind of like what they do, but it just like raises like the hairs on the back of my neck a lot because like that's creepy to hear someone's voice and think it's them and it's not them, like they didn't call for you. It reminds me of like those moments when you're alone and you could swear like that you heard, like I heard your voice call for my name and I'm like, you're not even here, how are you calling my name? Like that doesn't make sense. It makes me think of those moments and just think like, is that a ghost? Is that a mimic? Is that my head playing tricks on me? What's happening?
I was really excited when I read this story. I knew I had to share it on here because this is our first, mimic story, and it's a very interesting concept. And I, like you said, right, like hearing somebody's voice even though they're not there, like very familiar with that because when I was younger, I swear I would always hear my dad. Generally, it would literally just only be my dad. Now that I think about it, I would always hear his voice calling me or just yelling out like to come or something, right? And it would never be anybody else's voice. And I just, obviously I would same issue, right? I would go and he would just be confused, like, what are you talking about? Nobody ever called me. And it's so weird because, like people will look at you crazy, like, okay, you're just hearing things or this and that, but like, for a fact that it was them, even if it may sound like it was far away. And then it just gets you thinking, like, what is going on?
I know one story I think about when I think of like mimics or just hearing like just another person, like someone you know's voice in like a complete opposite direction of where they are. I listened to Markiplier's podcast where they talked about like scary things that has happened to them. And one time he talked about how when he was like with his like girlfriend at the time, he heard her call him and it was like in their room. And so he walks over there and he's just like, yeah, what do you want? And she appears behind him and goes like,
Oh
why are you
no,
calling
yeah,
for me?
that would
Like,
have freaked me out.
it just makes me think of like moments like that. Like that's scary.
Yeah, so like stuff like this, I really don't know. Like, I mean, I feel like there has to be, there's always some name for some sort of phenomenon like this. Like, I don't know why I just thought of this right now, but like, have you ever heard of like phantom phone syndrome or something like that, where like you
Oh yeah,
swear
I
you
have.
got, like your phone just buzzed and then your phone's in your hand. Like, like you swear you felt it in
Mm.
your pocket and it's not even there. Like that's happened to me multiple times. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure somebody somewhere out there has coined a term for this phenomenon of hearing your name called and no one being there or something like that.
I know I've definitely seen possibly like like psychology TikToks. They're probably fake. Talk about like the phenomenon where when you're like really bored and your brain has no like stimulants, it makes something up.
And I know you guys can't see us here, but I just shook my head at that comment. I don't know. I felt like like yes, there are some explanations for a lot of things in this world, but it just seems like, man, they can never let us have anything. Like, why can't something just be paranormal or just unexplained? It always has to be something.
I feel like this case is definitely a paranormal case though, since it happened multiple times to multiple people.
I think that's the strangest part because you could just think like something's just messing with you, but when everybody else is hearing other people's voices, that is just weird.
Yeah, it's definitely not just like a random occurrence. This is a repeating thing that's happening.
Just to end off, I just do want to mention that I don't know if this has anything to do with this, but this user does mention that they are Wiccan. So, I mean, that is not to say that there's anything wrong with that or that they are practicing anything that they shouldn't be practicing, but like, who knows? We always talk about people who are more susceptible to these things. So, what if they are potentially one of those people? And that was There May Be a Mimic in Our House by user Little Katie _E. I feel I should preface this story with the statement that I am usually a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stories, albeit an open-minded one. I had never had an experience I would truly say was paranormal until this one. I have searched for hours on Google attempting to find a similar story from someone else and have had no luck. What really stands out for me is that there is an energy or feeling that accompanies the experience, and even remembering it still gives me this feeling and goosebumps. This is not something I normally experience, and most people that know me would probably be surprised that I would be spooked by much of anything. I am a veteran, and I have spent years since leaving the military working in emergency rooms, specialized security, and doing other high adrenaline jobs, and I'm not prone to being creeped out. I am hoping to find someone else who may have had a similar experience, as I feel oddly compelled to relate to someone about this. A couple of months ago, I was driving with my wife down a rural highway in Oregon, returning home from a road trip to Crater Lake. We live on the coast, and the highway we were taking to get back is very curvy as it winds through the Cascade Mountain Range. It was dark as ink and probably around 11 p.m. We were driving along and I was watching the road going about 45 miles per hour. We round a bend, which makes me slow down to about 45, and just as we get around it, my wife suddenly says, "Look, there's a person there." It takes me a second for some reason as I let off the gas, and then I notice her/it. Crouched near the side of this 2-lane highway is a person wearing what looks like gray baggy sweats or clothes and a reflective vest. This is an easy 20 miles either direction from civilization, and is heavily wooded, think Oregon coast forest. I begin braking, and instantly the figure stands up, faces us, and begins jogging directly at the car. It felt like electricity in the air when she faced us. Her head was flopped to the side, like her neck was totally limp, and her mouth was wide open. She appeared to have gray hair, and her arms and hands were held up to her chest. Her wrists curled. Her legs didn't seem to be working right either as she hobbled at us. Think like severe progressed MS. Then it hit. This primal-like feeling of dread, like my subconscious knew something wasn't right. I couldn't fully focus on her as the car was still moving and I had to steer, but my wife was looking right at her. My first thought normally would have been to hit the brakes and see what was going on, as once again this is literally miles and miles from the town, but there was just this dread feeling in the air, and time seemed to slow down. At that moment I hear my wife say, "Don't stop, just go." Instinctively, I accelerated. As we sped up, this lady was jogging right at us and must have come within a foot of running into the side of our car as we went past her. We rounded the next bend and I looked at my wife and just said, "What the hell was that? I should turn around. Who the hell jogs out here? What was wrong with her neck?" My wife just looks at me and says, "No, don't go back. I don't know what that was." I told her I couldn't look directly at her for long as I was focused on the road, but described what I saw and she confirmed she saw the same thing. She said when she came up to the side of the car, she was staring right at us and my wife looked in her eyes, but she didn't have any pupils and her expression stayed just like frozen with her mouth open. We scoured news stories and I even contacted authorities. They advised no one was reported missing or hurt out there. I still get this strange, intense, electrified feeling anytime I think about her, as does my wife. Anytime I talk about her, I'm compelled to refer to the person as it. All I know is it wasn't right. We have now coined her the floppy-headed jogger. Anyone else experienced something like this? Clearly you see why I chose this.
Yes, I do.
I have never, ever heard of anything like this in any YouTube story compilation, anybody telling me, or anything I've ever found up until now.
Me either. Like, I haven't heard anything like that. It kind of reminds me of something that would happen in like a horror movie or like a scary video game. Just like, to me, it reminds me of like body horror because of just like how limp and how like they described how this thing looked, and it gave me the chills because like, oh my god, like her mouth was open, her neck was limp, and her head was just to the side. Like, oh my god, like that's just so scary to see, like basically like loose, not loose skin, because it still had a form and shape that it was human, but like kind of like loose skin just running after your car.
The bones, I guess, were missing, so obviously it's just flopping around. It has no like foundation to it. It can't just sit upright or stand upright. This is just so weird. A couple people were talking about that it could have potentially be, I guess, like a highway spirit, but I have never heard of any spirit that manifests so clearly, because they clearly thought that this was either like an injured person or they don't even know what it was, because this user even refers to it, the woman, right, quotation marks around that, as it, because he doesn't know what it is. He mentions it that it's a he, her, or it, like he really could not tell. So it just makes you think like, what in the world was this?
I mean, if the people that were commenting on it were possibly right, like, oh, maybe it's like a highway ghost, maybe it is. And the fact that they were jogging is because they were jogging in that area and they got hit so badly that their mouth just remains open, and like just like their injuries were just so bad, and they probably were never even found because I guess, I mean, like the poster said, no one ever jogs in that area. So
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, it doesn't make sense. If you were to be, say like it's a spirit that's stranded there jogging, you would have to be like a marathon runner, because he mentions that there is no, like, I guess, like civilization for like another 20 miles in either direction. So, like, where are you jogging to? To me, I pictured it as like, okay, if this is a spirit, it's asking for help because it ran into the direction of the car. If this was a person, why would you run at a car that is turning? You're clearly not going to get in or, do anything. Like, they didn't stop. So if this was a person, you have to be aware of the fact that most likely you're going to get hit, right? You're going to get hurt. And obviously this thing or this person, whatever it was already hurt. So, like, what was this?
I kind of want to just keep going with like the idea that it was someone, like a highway spirit, and maybe they were like a marathon runner. I mean, the fact that they jogged even with all those injuries, like it kind of shows that maybe they're determined to go after these people and be like, help me finally rest. That's kind of like, if we're going with that kind of story, I kind of can see it in that way. But I also kind of just think that it's probably like just some creature, like I don't know, like it's just when I try to picture this, because I feel like whenever I like just reading stories, like I see the images that people create very vividly, and this one just makes me feel like sick to my stomach because it just sounds like, I hate body horror, so it just makes me feel so uncomfortable to envision this.
If you don't mind, can you explain what body horror is for some of us that might not know what that is?
Oh my god. Okay.
AKA me.
So basically body horror is like, I guess, just horror that has to deal with like disfigured bodies, like to like an unexplained,
So
not
like
unexplained,
gore,
like
basically, kind of, right?
gore, but like in the sense of like maybe someone is freakishly tall, like taller than any like human could actually naturally be.
Okay.
Or maybe they have super long limbs, or maybe like all their bones are broken, and or they have like just like they basically
like the gray man story that I just told about the guy, or that, not guy, but the person, really like 7 feet tall, arms all the way down to their knees. And I mean, if you're 7 feet tall, there's just long ass arms.
Yeah. So basically, like, that's body horror.
Okay. So like Slender Man.
I know a good
kinda weird
example.
like that, right?
Yeah, Slender Man. A good example, if you guys have ever seen like the monsters or like characters or like villains in the Little Nightmare game, that's a really good example of body horror, where their necks are freakishly long at random moments. And yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I see how, I guess, if you are scared of that, right? I see how that would, like the description itself, just with the floppy neck and just jumping around, like it reminds me of a, I guess, like legend from like, I think it's South America, known as like La Pata Sola, like, the one leg, the one leg woman, and she just hops everywhere, and that's kind of the way that I pictured it, because this person says that they were jogging, like quote jogging, because they couldn't move, their body was just mangled basically. I really don't know what this is. Um, Somebody somewhere, I don't know if it's with this specific story, but I seen it somewhere that I guess people mention that spirits or demons will possess a body and take a hold of that body and try to get to another body or something like that. So, I mean, hey, I'm just trying to offer some explanations here. It seems very far fetched. When that person did mention that, I don't remember if it was a story or not. There's plenty of comments with this one, so I can't find that anymore right here. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. About a demon jumping from body to body. It seems like something that you would see like in the movies. Like I gotta capture this soul, and I need a more powerful one. Like they always start off
Yeah.
as a child or something, or like an animal. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, but I really do not know what this was. And that was Strange Person on Oregon Highway 22 near the coast at night by user dignified_fruit. All my life, and even now, I have experienced everything from creeps, pure bad luck, paranormal, and even the downright unexplainable. I will most definitely be sharing all these stories. Today I will be talking about my late grandmother. To preface this, I'm a 29-year-old female. It was a summer I had just turned 13. I came home from a friend's house to find my mother packing a suitcase. Upon further inspection, I saw that it was my clothes she was packing. She sat me down at the edge of her bed and told me that my grandfather was in the hospital with severe pneumonia. She told me I was being sent to my grandmother's house for 2 weeks to take care of her, while the rest of my family helped my aunt clean out her big house and move what they could to Florida. My mother would be staying with my grandfather in the hospital, while my father watched my siblings. It's not that I didn't love my grandmother, but I had just turned 18, and all I wanted to do was play video games and go to the beach for the summer. So I was already dreading having to spend 24/7 taking care of my grandmother in a hot as hell, stifling house because she hated the sound the air conditioner made. She was also in the early stages of dementia. Now I had heard the horror stories that involved my grandmother, and honestly, I thought they were either hearsay or my aunts and uncles were exaggerating. So here I was alone with my grandmother in a tiny apartment with walls as thin as paper and the hot summer heat refusing to have mercy for 2 weeks. My grandmother was not sweet by any means. She was as mean as they came. Whatever food I made her, she would throw at me and say I was useless as my mother, or she would actually mistake me for my mother and proceed to hit me or throw the closest thing she had near her at me. And what's worse, she only spoke Spanish. Now I could understand Spanish better than I could speak it, a small detail I figured I'd mention. I'm telling you this so you can understand what kind of person she was and has always been. I had to sleep on the couch that was pushed up against the wall next to her room. You'll understand why I'm mentioning this in a moment. A few nights into taking care of her, it was 1 a.m. and I was on the couch trying to fall asleep, but it was just too hot. My grandmother liked to fall asleep watching novelas. The TV was on low, but I could hear my grandmother whispering in a language that wasn't Spanish. I couldn't make out what it was. It just sounded like slurred whispers. She started knocking on the wall in processions of 3. I got up and went to her room. I softly opened her door to see her sitting upright, staring at a specific corner of the room. She paid no attention to the fact that I had just entered the room. "Abuela, did you need something?" I called out to her. She slowly rotated her body towards me, but never taking her eyes off of the corner of the room. "Déjame en paz," her raspy whispered voice enunciated. I looked to the corner of the room and saw absolutely nothing. I shrugged, backed out of her room, and slowly closed the door. Not once did she look at me. Throughout the next day, my grandmother was oddly quiet, docile even. She ate the food I made her, didn't fuss when I moved her to the wheelchair to change her bedpan, and even let me brush her weak, brittle hair. I pushed her in her wheelchair to the bathroom to bathe her. Normally when I would help her into the bath, she would hit and slap me, but today, nothing. She just kept staring at something over my shoulder, and when I would turn around, there was nothing ever there. As I finished bathing her, I sat her on a stool just beside the bathtub while I dressed her. I became increasingly aware of the silence that passed through us. Now, just a quick explanation of the apartment setup. If you come in through the back door, you are automatically in the kitchen. All the way in the left corner was a door to the bathroom. Straight ahead of you was a doorway to the living room, and in the living room was her one and only door to her bedroom. Again, this was a tiny apartment. As I got ready to help transfer her to the wheelchair, I noticed it wasn't in the bathroom with us where I left it. Confused, I sat my grandmother back down in the stool to look for her wheelchair. My grandmother couldn't walk unaided. My grandmother began to chuckle softly, the first sound she made all day. I found her wheelchair in the living room, wheels locked and everything. I unlocked the wheels and pushed it back towards the bathroom. I was surprised to find my grandmother wasn't in the bathroom where I left her. Niña! My grandmother called from her bedroom. I run to her bedroom to see her sitting up in the bed pointing to the small TV in her room. I walk over and turn it on to her favorite novela. I walk back to the bathroom and push her wheelchair to her room. I'm confused because 1. My grandmother can't walk, much less stand without assistance. 2. This all happened within the span of a few minutes. And 3. My grandmother would have had to pass me to get to her bedroom from the bathroom. I do my best to push that weird occurrence out of my mind as me being delirious from the heat. As I go to sleep that night, I wake to the sound of heavy footsteps in my grandmother's room, as well as the sound of white noise coming from the TV, and the same slurred whispers. My heart is racing as I look to the tiny digital clock on the entertainment center, exactly 1 a.m. I get up slowly and walk quietly to my grandmother's door. I listen for a minute and it sounds as if heavy footsteps are pacing. The door rattles against the frame with each step. In one fluid motion, I open the door and peer in. This time, my grandmother actually acknowledges my presence. Her eyes were filled with malice, but she formed a small smile. "What, niña?" she says softly with a coo, as if she was soothing a crying baby. "What was that sound, abuela?" I asked her. She chuckled from deep in her throat. "My friend came to play," she said in a sing-song voice. "Now get out!" I slammed the door shut and fell onto the couch, my heart still racing. I didn't fall back asleep. The next few days passed, and my grandmother was back to her usual demeaning and insulting self. My mind was still not at ease. In fact, I began to fear falling asleep at night. One afternoon, my mother called to check up on me, and I told her how rude my grandmother was and other strange occurrences. "Your grandmother has dementia. You know that," she said. "She was always hateful and abusive towards me while I was growing up. When you were born, she called you her doll and said that having you was the only thing I ever did right." She sighed and I could tell how sad she was. "She still loves you no matter what," was all she had said before she hung up. It felt like I had been dismissed. That night, I woke up to the couch being moved violently away from the wall to my grandmother's room. I thought I was dreaming at first and I didn't make any move to get up until I was forcibly pulled from the couch by my ankle. It wasn't until I was on the floor that I got up and looked around the room. I quickly turned on the lamp and saw that the couch was moved a good foot away from the wall. I looked over and saw the door to my grandmother's room was open. I walked to her door, but not before it slammed shut in my face. Shocked, I stood there for a minute. "Muñeca?" my grandmother called from the other side of the door. I opened the door to see her laying down, staring at the same corner of the room as before. "Don't be scared. You'll make him mad," was all she said before closing her eyes and turning over to her side. I closed the door, I moved the couch back against the wall, and sat down. I fell back to sleep with the lights on. The next few days passed without incident. My grandmother was sweet to me. She was unnerving. While in her room, I brushed her hair as she told me stories of when she was younger. She then reached into her vanity table and pulled out a small tube and handed it to me. I read the label and it said Arnicare. Confused, I asked her what it was for. She pointed to my leg and said, "It's for your bruises." I lifted my pant leg up to see a deep bruise on my ankle. I looked up at her in the mirror and saw that she was visibly upset. "I'll protect you," was all she said. The day my mother came to pick me up, my uncle came with her. "I heard what happened," he said, as he placed a hand on my shoulder, a look of concern on his face. I'll take over from here. I gathered my things and said goodbye to my grandmother. She grabbed my hand and placed a small golden cross into my palm. For protection, she said. She then lifted the hem of her skirt to reveal deep bruises on her ankles. He doesn't want to be my friend anymore, she whispered, and then looked over at the same corner of the room. I felt a chill down my spine. My mother came in and asked if I was ready to go. On the way home, I told her about the occurrence that had happened the night after she had called and asked her for more about my grandmother. My mom rubbed her forehead and then told me, Your grandmother is a Satanist. She worships the devil. She always has for as long as I could remember, but you were her one and only favorite out of all her kids and grandkids. I still don't know why. The rest of the drive home was quiet. I still don't know why either. My grandmother passed away 10 years later. The night I turned 23, I had a dream that my grandmother knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, I saw her. She was standing in the hallway. I have to leave now. I love you, muñeca, was all she said. I woke up to the sound of my mother knocking on the door. I opened it, and she sobbed in my arms. Your grandmother passed. There are many things in my life I can't explain. I wish there were answers. Thanks for listening to my story.
What the hell? So basically, she was taking care of her grandma for like a long time, right?
Yeah, like she was basically in charge of caring for her grandmother while her grandfather was in the hospital, and like the whole family was basically like helping out with that situation.
Yeah.
So they put this 13-year-old girl who just turned 13,
Mhm.
mind you, in charge of an elderly woman.
Honestly, like when I was hearing the story and the parts where like the grandmother would go, "Oh, my friend has come to play," or like he's here. Those parts, I was just like, "Huh?" That's so creepy to like hear. And it made me wonder like who is this friend that's coming to visit her? Who is this friend? Like it made me like it felt like it was not a good like immediately I kind of thought like this isn't a good person that's coming or that she's like inviting into the home.
Yeah, like I think this story has really, I mean, there could be many explanations for this story, I think. I think the first thing that we have to address before we talk about anything like paranormal is the fact that this is an elderly woman, right? Like we said. And that she was, as the original poster mentioned, like in the early stages of dementia. And dementia, like, it obviously it's messes with your brain. So I've heard of things where like people with dementia will like just experience strange things, and obviously we're not able to see what they see, so we really don't know what it is. I think that when you get to the very end of the story, right, the mother mentions that the grandmother has always been a practicing Satanist. Like even like as the mother says, as long as she could remember. So her own daughter remembers her being a Satanist from, we could assume she was very little. This goes back to, I guess, when I mentioned that if I feel like if you believe in this almighty being, right, like a god and all this, you have to believe in the opposite. There's no way that there could just be one and not the other, right? So there has to be a reason why our sins are saved and all this. I mean, in most religions there is, a devil, for a lack of a better term, there is that evil. To think that the grandmother was practicing and worshiping that evil, and I mean there is stuff to like back it up, I guess, that this evil presence was actually there. It wasn't just something. I know I just mentioned that we have to acknowledge the fact that she had dementia. That will only affect her. It's not going to affect the original poster who was 13 years old at the time.
Yeah.
So how do you explain her, getting physically thrown on the couch like across the room and bruise marks on her ankles?
And also like how do you explain her grandma getting up by herself and everything like that? with no assistance, even though she always needed assistance. That's why
Yeah.
she was there. That's why the poster was there, you know?
I think that was like one of the most shocking parts to me is that like the grandmother obviously couldn't walk. So what carried her and what moved her wheelchair? Like it seemed like this whole thing was planned out, right? Okay, let's move the wheelchair so that this uh, teenage girl will have to go get it, and by the time she gets back, gone. She's not there anymore. And then even the grandmother calls out and is like, "Oh, I don't honestly, I couldn't really read exactly what like emotion was they were trying to express there. Whether the grandmother was like frightened or like a sense of panic or just like, hey, I'm over here, like I'm over here. This thing moved me, kind of like I'm used to this now. I really couldn't tell you. It's so interesting how there would be these moments of the grandmother lashing out at her, right? And treating her the way she would everybody else. And then these moments of her just being nice and calm and not really talking. And that moment exactly where she says that was the first thing she said all day. What if, like, the grandmother was protecting her from something by calling her, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mother states clearly that she is her favorite for whatever reason. She says she's treated everybody, all of her kids and grandkids, terribly. And like the user flat out says it, like her grandmother was not a good person.
Mm-hmm. Very abusive to them all.
Exactly. But for some reason, she was very fond of the user. So, I mean, like, what are your thoughts? What do you think was going on here?
Once I learned that the grandmother was like a practicing like Satanist ever since like the poster's mother could remember, it kind of made me, it kind of like connected the dots for me. Like, okay, so their friend is someone that likely that she has worked with in her practice and whatever she did beforehand, and maybe they come back to her because my thoughts was like that this whatever was coming to her came back and is just like, okay, I want to work with you again. And I feel like since they had like this young person that's probably easily susceptible to things, like this like entity, I don't know, like was probably trying to like convince the grandmother to possibly get the poster into like the same kind
Like
of
to
thing,
give,
and
basically, like, kind of give her up in a sense, right? Like,
mhm,
okay, let me have her.
let me have my connection with her as well. Like I want to like whatever they had going on, whatever the grandmother did, I feel like possibly that's what they wanted, the entity. And maybe the grandmother was like, no. And so when she told her like he's not my friend no more, like, and everything like that, I feel like that's probably like when their relationship like just severed, and like she kind of just stopped, and she's like, I need to protect her now. Like I need to protect my grandchild now.
I think that's a good interpretation of that. I never thought of it that way. I think that goes in hand with like the end of the story when she's going to leave. The grandmother gives her like a cross, and I mean, I really don't know much about other religions, especially Satanists. I don't know what they do, what they practice, but
Me either.
something just tells me, right, from popular culture or whatever, they don't really interact with crosses. So for the grandmother to give this to her, it was almost as if like, I know what I've done in my life, and I don't want that for you.
Yeah, that's how I saw it as.
So I think that's a really good take where you were saying that, like, who knows if it was the other way around where the poster was sent to go help out, the aunt or whatever, and the mom was with her mom, right? The grandmother. Who knows if she would just have let this thing get her? I just think there's a lot of unanswered questions here.
There definitely is.
And it is, I mean, it seems like so much happened. We don't know, at least, I mean, I'm not getting off the top of my head how long this took. Like, if this was over a month, multiple months, weeks, like whatever the case may be. But I just feel like this is, no matter what, this is a lot to go through in any amount of time, especially at the young age of 13. Like, it was enough for me when I saw the rake. Can you imagine if I had a full-on, like, demon in the house and it was just me and my grandmother?
Yeah,
Like, no, I do not know what I would do.
Me either. That would be like, I'd be like, okay, that's enough experiences for me. I never want to deal with this ever again in my life.
And that was, I think my grandmother belonged to a cult, by user XCEACELESSX. And yes, I spelled that out because I do not want to butcher their name.
And with that, I'll get into my roommate's story. So my roommate's name is Alyssa, and she tells me these stories that have happened throughout her whole life, basically. And they started off when she was very young, all the way up until recent times, till literally last year. The earliest stories she told me about were from this older apartment complex that she used to live in with her mom, sister, and stepdad. She told me it was a very haunted complex, and everyone who lived there had an experience. She also mentioned how sketchy it was, but it was cheap to live there, so they stayed. In this apartment, she remembers her younger sister would always talk to the closet, as if someone was in there. It was a very regular occurrence. This closet was one of those sliding door closet where you just had to push it to the side and it'd open. So one day they asked her, "Who are you talking to in the closet?" And she says, "I'm talking to the tall, shadowy man in the closet." She would always talk to this man, I'm telling you, like every day. And it concerned her mother for obvious reasons. But originally, she thought the man was probably a close friend who had recently passed away from their dads. It wasn't until another person who lived in the apartments told her mom that they saw a tall shadow man walk around the building and in their kitchen, that their mom finally had enough, and they decided to go move in with their grandma, leaving the strange tall man and other weird experiences they had in the same place. That story, like, when she told me that, I legit just looked at her like, what the hell? Because it kind of reminds me of, like, all the times, like, all, like, the stories we read about, like, little kids having, like, talking to things and stuff like that. Or, like, I guess it reminded me mostly of, like, we watched Mr. Nightmare on YouTube and, like, how he would show, like, kids' drawings in some videos and he'd be like, it'd be like, oh, this is my friend. And it's, like, some creepy entity that they drew.
Yeah, kids are scary. Kids can be scary.
And so when she told me the story, I looked at her, I was like, what the hell? And so after I was just like, originally she couldn't remember how the man looked, but then she had remembered that the reason why they ended up leaving was because another person in the same apartment complex told their mom, like, no, yeah, like, I've been seeing, like, this tall man, like, I saw it in your kitchen, I saw it in my kitchen, and just, like, all around the building, this just super tall shadow man, basically.
I think, like, good on the parents right there, just writing it off as, like, okay, you know, kids just, like, seeing whatever imaginary friend, whatever the case may be, like, you're making it up. And then you have, you know, what we would deem a more, you know, reliable source, an adult, telling them, like, yeah, no, I seen that too. And that is just
Yeah.
crazy, like, creepy. Like, I don't know what I would do, but I mean, good on them, they got out of there.
I thought it was interesting that her mom kind of was just, like, okay with the fact that, not really okay, but, like, they had recently had, like, a close friend pass away, and they kind of thought it was them talking to like, my roommate's sister. And I thought that was interesting because it also made me think of, like, those other stories that where spirits will reach out, like, to the kids and everything like that. And I think it's because, you know, kids, I feel like people always say, like, kids are more closer to, like, the spirit world since, like, they're so young and everything like that. They had just recently been born or whatever. And so, like, I can understand her mom just being like, okay, maybe it's that. But then as soon as, like, she learned, like, no, it's something else, she, like, quickly was just like, we're going.
Yeah, no, she's like, okay, that crossed the line.
But once they moved in with their grandmother, the strange paranormal occurrences didn't stop there. The place that they lived in with their grandma was very old. It actually was a few years short from being a historic monument when they lived there.
Wow.
And so, like, you could already think, like, this house is basically, like, having so much history, like, literally just a couple years short from being a historic monument.
Yeah.
It's an old house. To preface the story, my roommates, Thea, had recently moved out of her grandma's house, so her room was completely empty and locked with an actual padlock. The strangest experience my roommate had was that one day while they were watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space in the living room, something happened. I'll note here that her Thea's room was the closest to the living room, so while watching the movie, they heard a TV turn on in her Thea's room. And as I said earlier, her Thea was no longer living there, and she had her door physically locked. So, they were all confused on why the TV had turned on. Her grandma got up and unlocked the door, turned the TV off to ensure that no one could enter, and turned the TV on again. And so they continued the movie, but then it turned on again. So her grandma got up, unlocked the door again, turned off the TV again, and locked the door again. And they continued to watch the movie. But then the TV turned on. This time, her grandma unlocked the door, and not only did she turn the TV off, but she fully unplugged it, and she went to go lock the door back up. This time, the lock began to violently shake, and everyone looked at her grandma, and they asked her if she was doing that. And she goes, "No, I'm not even touching it."
That is crazy. See, I didn't really know where this was going. It just seemed like something was obviously messing with them with the whole turning it on and on and off and on and off. But then you escalated to the block just like shaking, like going crazy. It just reminded me of like a poltergeist, like something messing with them.
That's what I thought too when she told me the story. I was just like, it sounds like something's trying to like just bother them, like a poltergeist or something. And she told me how like they called her Thea after and being like, "Hey, like what's wrong with your TV? Why is it doing this?" And her Thea was just like confused and like, "What do you mean? Like nothing's wrong with it? Like I've never had anything happen like that." And they were all just so confused because nothing, like they've had like strange occurrences in the houses where like weird things would happen, but nothing ever like that where after like they dealt with it, something like got mad or something and just started shaking something. Like it's just so weird, you know? And it also reminded me of the story that our Thea told us about like the TV turning on upstairs.
Yeah, very similar.
It was like very similar. And so she told me that her grandma had thought like maybe it was just some electrical thing, and so that's why she unplugged it. I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember if she had told me if the TV tried to turn, like the TV turned back on again or not. But I think she did. I just wasn't too sure. I should definitely ask her, and I'll update you guys again on the next episode. But I remember her saying that the TV had turned on again even after she had unplugged it. And that's when after she had turned it off again, after it being unplugged and everything like that, that's when the lock went all crazy and was just shaking right in front of them. And like, I don't know. When I heard the story, I was like freaked out. I was just like, what the hell?
Yeah, that is creepy for sure.
This next story from my roommate is around the time when she was in 4th or 5th grade. Her and her family lived in a studio, kind of around the same property as like the really old house that she lived in with her grandma, but not the same place. She told me how the studio would always smell like cigarettes, even though no one smoked. She would tell me how her mom would also hear like someone in the kitchen trying to turn the gas stove on, and you just hear like the clicking, like the click, 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 click. And when she'd go in there, no one was there, and she'd had to turn it off. Alyssa would sleep on an air mattress with her mom and sister, and her stepdad would sleep on the couch. One night, her mom woke up and saw her standing there, right next to her dad. She was a little confused on why she was up, so she reached up to lay her back down, but her hand went right through her, as if she was air. This woke her up. She was confused and quickly looked to see if Alyssa was laying down next to her. She was. Her mom woke up her stepdad and explained to him what she was seeing. And he saw it too, but he didn't want to spook her, and he did his best to calm her down. The next day, though, he talked about how he saw the exact same thing she did. And that same day, her sister woke up in the middle of the night and went to go to the restroom when she saw Alyssa standing there in front of the restroom. But she was sleeping right next to her when she woke up. How could there be two of her? And the same night, her mom had woken up too, and she saw it again, but this time she was in the kitchen. Obviously, her mom was rightfully frightened and told her family. They took her to go get baptized, and they dunked her in holy water and had her sleep with crystals every night since. And it stopped. After a couple of years, though, the crystals broke, and they disposed of them, and she was fine ever since. And they still talk about the little devil version of Alyssa to this day. So when I heard the story originally, I was thinking immediately of the movie Insidious. I don't know if you thought of that too, kind of like where like your like the spirit leaves the body and like
the
you're able to
dream
roam.
state.
Yeah, the dream state. That's what I thought of. And I asked her, I was like, "Do you remember like moving around your house or like around the studio that you were in?" And she said, "No, I do not have any recollection of anything. I don't remember standing there, nothing." Like I even asked her, I was just like, "Were you like the exact same, like in the exact same pajamas you were sleeping in? Like how, like, was there anything different about the version of you just standing there that they saw?" And she said it was basically an exact version of her, but in like a different outfit that she could wear, just standing there.
That's weird.
And yeah, it's weird, huh? And each time, like, her mom tried to reach for her, like, a couple of times the first time she saw it. And each time her hand just faded right through her as if she wasn't there.
That is so, oh my God, that's just so crazy. Like a literal dream manifested, basically.
Yeah. Like a literal apparition of basically this person's daughter.
A living person.
Of a living person. And she could easily just see Alyssa just sleeping right next to her. And it's just, like, that's so scary to think
Dude,
of.
I don't even know what the hell I do. Like, freak the hell out. I'm like, what's next to me?
And so, honestly, like, good on her stepdad for not freaking her mom out even more the first time he saw it. Because imagine, like, you're, like, someone waking you up and being like, "Do you see this?" And you, like, it's just being the craziest thing in the world.
Yeah, really, like... like what? How would you even explain that? Like, how do you have two daughters at that point?
Yeah, like that's so like that's just so scary. Like because how she explained it to me is that like the bed and like not the bed, the air mattress and like the couch that her stepdad would sleep on were very close by, and where she was standing was like at the foot of the couch where her stepdad was. He basically was just seeing another version of her like right across from him, right next to him, but like it also wasn't her. Like they talked to her and like she couldn't respond and none of that, and like that's just so scary. Like I don't know how her mom fell back to sleep.
Yeah, definitely. Like, oh my God, I don't even know. That's just like weird because we've kind of talked about like dreams and just like astral projecting, or I don't know, we necessarily talked about astral projecting, but lucid dreaming and being able to like control where you go, what you do and all that. But I really have never heard anything like that. I mean, that's a whole different concept, honestly. Like a literal dream come to life. It makes you think, like, for those of you that are like Marvel fans, you know, they talk about the alternate universes, right, that exist at the same time, and how there are many different like variations of things all occurring at once, the multiverse, right? Is this like a slip or like how people will say like a glitch in the matrix, where something from a different reality came to life, because this is still at night, right? Like she's still sleeping, and there'd be a reason why she wouldn't be able to hear what was going on or respond back and why he fade through, because maybe she wasn't meant to see this.
That's interesting that you bring it up because, like, I know, like, I really wasn't thinking of that way. I was honestly just going with the fact that, like, maybe her soul just went out her body and was just standing there. That's what I was thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you could really argue anything, because for one, I've never heard of this happening before, so I don't know what to call it.
Me either.
And yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what those TikTok sociologists or psychologists have to say about this.
Me too. I know one thing she told me about is that, like, each of her family members, like, obviously her stepdad saw it with her mom that first time as well, but, like, each of them have seen it, and originally they didn't tell her younger sister about, like, the fact that their mom had seen it too until, like, later on. Like, her sister had told their parents and was just like, oh, I saw Alyssa, but she was also, like, asleep, and, like, she was crying about it, because that's, like, freaky, like, what the hell. And they didn't tell her, like, oh, we saw it too the other day. They didn't tell her that, because that would freak me out even more. I'd be like, huh,
exactly.
What's going on with my sister?
Like, do I have two now?
Yeah. And I find it interesting that, like, I don't know what they did, but, like, it worked. It stopped literally right after. She said after the being baptized, after sleeping with the crystals for so long,
And
like, it has never happened again.
Her in holy water at all times.
Like, it just never happened again. Yeah, that was honestly, like, just when she told me that, when we talked about stuff early on, and I was just in my head, I was just like, hopefully I don't see that.
Yeah, no.
I'm gonna wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, you're gonna see two of them. Well, I mean, at least she gave you a heads up. That's probably why she wanted to tell you this. Just like, hey, just in case you see two of me, don't freak out.
These last two stories are from when she recently moved into her uncle's house after he passed away. Alyssa and her sister didn't have a room quite yet, and so they sleep in their younger cousin's room. One night, her and her sister were sleeping in the girls' room upstairs. They had only recently moved in. This room was right next to her tia and her Nino's room. Typically, my roommate wakes up throughout the night, so she found herself awake, just laying in bed. She remembers her and her sister had closed the window because the wind could be strong enough to just open the door, and they don't really want that happening. But even though they had closed them, she remembered hearing the door slowly begin to open, until it was just wide open. She looked over, no one was there, and after a bit of time, it slowly closed shut. This would happen 2 separate times. Once then they had recently moved in, and a more recent time. And each time, no one stood there, and the window was closed. Another time in the same room, she remembers that her tia had finally fallen asleep, and they were all sleeping or about to, when her little cousin walked over and told her sister that the TV was turned on. They walked over to the room with the TV, and sure enough, it was on, playing the Tom and Jerry movie. That was the last movie her uncle saw with his kids before he passed away. The creepiest part of it all, to use the TV, you would have to log into the laptop connected to it, pull up the website for whatever streaming service, and select the movie you wanted. They hadn't used the TV in a while, so they definitely didn't have it on that movie. Those are like two like the bigger occurrences that would happen after her uncle passed away and she moved in to like his house to help with their tia and like the kids. And she told me how just after moving in, it was just kind of like chaos a little bit with like so many like random occurrences happening. And she told me like sometimes like the fire alarm would just go off randomly. And so they kind of thought like maybe it's because like the batteries are running out, so they need to replace them. But even after they had removed them, literally the next day, it went off again. And it would just keep going on and off. And so they ended up just like taking it off completely. They're like, no, no, thank you.
Man, I just think that's so crazy. And the last bit where it was like, it showed the last movie, or it was playing the last movie that her uncle had seen with, you know, his kids. I think there's just something so like heartwarming about that, you know? And I think the fact that, you know, for all we know, you know, the Theo, he was probably like a really big individual, right? Really big personality and all that. So maybe that's all that energy that is manifesting is his like spirit in the house. And you could be triggering that fire alarm and all these different things to happen. And I mean, it could have, you know, it could be like a sign with that movie at the very end of the story.
I know she told me of like other little stories about how they've kind of been concerned about one of her younger cousins who's kind of talking to herself a bit, and also just feeling like as if someone's there when no one else is there with them in like a room, and just feeling like a presence there. And she says that after all these experiences, like she could kind of start telling when something's bad, like when something feels off in like a bad way where like she's not safe. But the presence, it doesn't feel bad. It feels like as if it's him. It's her Nino, it's her uncle, you know. It's him. And I thought, and to me, like that's very sweet, and it's very like nice to hear that like he's still there watching over them, you know. He still really loves them and he wants to be there for him. It's really sad to hear about how, like, to me when she told me about like the movie and everything like that, I was just like, oh, like,
yeah, that
he put on the last movie that he watched with them.
See, like stuff like this, I don't think they're coincidences. Like you can't just knock these things up to chance or, you know, whatever. Oh, a technical malfunction. Like it just doesn't make sense, you know. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that like when there's things like that, they are messages from like the individual that we may be thinking about. I know with our tita, which is our great grandmother, my mom, or our mom, right, she always say that like there would always be these doves at her house, right? And that when she passed away, she would always see a dove. Always see a dove at the house all the time. And I mean, I really haven't seen a dove at our house ever before, so I don't know.
I actually, whenever I'm outside with our dog, I sometimes see two doves actually, and I just see them together.
Yeah,
and it's always those two together.
And that's where I was gonna take this to, right? So like that first dove, and then, you know, shortly after she passed, about a year or so later, our Tito passed, our great grandfather passed, and that one dove turned into two doves. And so it's just, these things aren't like coincidences that like, oh, it just so happens that you start seeing these things or experiencing these things. Like they are signs. They're signs, you know.
They are definitely signs, yes.
So I just think overall, I mean, I think that's a good way to end off the stories, with a nice heartfelt one. And, you know, hopefully, for one, like your roommate has just gone through a whole life of paranormal happenings. And that's the thing that that's the beauty of sharing these stories, because just looking at somebody, you would never believe that they've gone through all these things, right? And so I think that's, like I said, you know, it's the beauty in doing this and having our podcast and being able to share these stories, because you may have these really crazy and scary stories like some of the ones that we shared today, and you may have other ones that are more heartfelt, and they don't always have to be scary, you know.
They
like
do
just
not.
like this one is a very good example of a story that gives you like a twist to, you know, your everyday paranormal or haunted happenings. Well, thanks, Samantha. Thank you to your roommate as well. And thank you guys for listening today. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. But as always, you already know that we are not going to leave you without something to talk about. And today, I think I have something that is going to make you guys talk, because this, I just don't even know. Like, I really don't even know. It was shocked me when I first seen this. Like, I honestly thought this was fake until I seen, like, the sources that were publishing it and talking about it.
I know you told me not to watch this. So.
Yeah, I like to preface things with Samantha, right? If she introduces something with me, she'll let me know, or I'll introduce something to her and preface it so like we kind of have an idea where we want to take things. But for this one, I told her, I was like, no, I want to see your reaction. I want to get your reaction with this too. So what I have for us today, I honestly don't know how you would describe it. And because of that, I'm just going to come out and say it, right? So truly, I don't think any of you would be able to guess what these people found. I don't even think any of these people involved imagined ever finding something like this, let alone in a food delivery bag. In February, Peruvian officials made a bizarre discovery. This all took place when Peruvian police stumbled upon a group of men drinking alone in a park in the city of Puno. That's when they realized that one of them had something in a delivery bag from the popular Latin American food delivery business, Pedidos Ya. Think of this as like, your Uber Eats or DoorDash, that sort of thing. What they found was a 600 to 800-year-old mummy sitting in the fetal position of this delivery bag. Now, I'll give you guys a moment. They found a literal mummy. 600 to 800 years old. Now, I don't think any of these people ever expected seeing this. And especially, this, being a police officer, you may think like you might see some crazy things in your life, right? Some grisly crime scenes or whatever. But would you ever imagine seeing a mummy just chilling with some dudes hanging out in the park drinking?
No.
Yeah.
That is not something I would even think could not happen, but like it's something that I could even think about. Like,
exactly.
What?
It just really, honestly, it just sounds like a bad dream. It just sounds like a really weird thing to happen. And well, the man was 26-year-old Julio Cesar Bermejo. And you may be thinking, what in the world are you doing walking around with a mummy on your back? And thankfully, the reporters thought the same thing, and they actually interviewed Julio about the whole thing. And as crazy as this story may be, it only gets crazier. Because when asked about the mummy, Julio stated it was named Juanita. And he went as far as to say that she was his, quote, spiritual girlfriend.
Okay.
His spiritual girlfriend. And he was being dead serious. You guys, there is a TikTok to accompany this. And I just, I'm putting it out there here. You will see the mummy. So if for whatever reason, mummified corpses, just corpses in general, creep you out, you may not want to scroll to our very last slide in our Instagram post, right? Or you may not even want to search this up. But I'm just giving that warning out there, right? There's nothing gruesome. It's not like it's a mangled body. This thing is 600 to 800 years old, right? Like I mentioned. I just wanted to put that out there. But look, it doesn't stop there. Because Julio also admitted that Juanita stayed with him. And he said, quote, "She's in my room. She sleeps with me. I take care of her." And, it's safe to say that Julio feels some sort of way or some sort of connection with the mummy. And I'm sure he'd be sad to find out that Juanita, as NBC News put it, is actually a Juan.
Oh my gosh.
So that's right. This story, it doesn't end there. As if this love story wasn't already full of drama, the researchers were able to conclude that the mummified corpse was in fact a male. So, like, Julio's spiritual girlfriend actually turned out to be his spiritual boyfriend. And I'm sure he probably didn't know this. But I just don't even know. Like, what? Not only do you find his mummy, and then you hear this story about this guy sleeping with it. And he claims, like, he says, like, he's like, she's mine. Like, this is mine, like, not like, oh, I found it somewhere. Like, no, like, he just flat out say, like, this is mine. It's just so strange, honestly. Like, I'm sure these people this was a day they'll never forget, right? Like, stumbling upon a guy with a mummy in his food delivery
looking through the comments right now, and the top one, it said, where do you even find that?
Exactly.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Exactly. And, I guess I kind of have some answers. I kind of have some answers for this. Okay. I guess, well, for one, Peru has lots of, like, historical significance, especially, like, I guess this area, the city, Puno, it's been known to, like, be an archaeological site where they found mummies before. So who knows if, like, they just happened to dig somewhere and they found this mummy, or where they may have gotten this, but he got it. And it's not like they stole it from anywhere. Nobody was missing a mummy. He just literally had this thing. And I know this may be a lot to take in, and I'm sure you're just like me, like, you still have a lot of unanswered questions. One of which being, where the hell did he get this mummy? And well, thanks to the newspaper Diario Cajamarca Noticias, we know that the mummy was in possession of Julio's family, and he had only brought it out to show his friends.
Oh my god.
So this guy wanted to brag to his friends and, be like, hey, look at my girl Juanita, like, she's pretty hot, right? And ends up getting caught. Like, who just says, like, hey, let's go get some drinks and let me show you this mummy I have? Like what?
I don't know. I mean, I bet his friends didn't believe him, but I mean, he pulled through.
Hey, that's a pretty good point. If my friend told me, hey, I got a mummy, meet me at the park if you want to see it, I'd be intrigued. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, a mummy? And then if I seen that, oh my god. Like, again, if you guys want to see this, go ahead and check it out on our Instagram at calaveriapod. And again, just that warning for you guys. It will show the mummified corpse.
It's a legit mummy.
It's a legit mummy. And it shows the delivery bag. It looks like a DoorDash bag, in all honesty.
It does. And my question for the DoorDash bag, does he DoorDash? Did he use it after?
Okay, you see, that was my thing too. That was literally one of the first things that I thought of. Like, he has this for a reason. He probably delivers food. And if he was carrying this thing around, chances are it's not the first time, Like, I mean, I would hope that he wasn't delivering food to people, using the same bag that this old corpse was in.
Imagine your Uber Eats driver pulls up and they have a mummy in this as their passenger person.
No. That's a no tip for sure. No tip for sure.
I don't know. It's a one-in-a-lifetime experience. Maybe.
Yeah. And well, as of the reporting of this story, Julio is in custody as investigators look further into this case. And, I don't blame them. I don't know. I don't even know if this is considered a crime in Peru. I have no idea. I'm sure they have plenty of questions to ask him, just like, we do. Like, what was going on? What made you want to take a mummy, and why? I just think it's so crazy how he just, like, flat out admitted the fact that, like, that's his girlfriend. Like, he says, like, yeah, that's my spiritual girlfriend. I sleep with her. She stays with me. If you guys watch that TikTok, it shows clips of that interview, and they do have that translation in Spanish too that, like, basically shows Julio stating that this is his girlfriend and he calls her Juanita. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that was a very interesting find, I should say.
Let us know what you guys think about Juanita. Is she hot? 10 out of 10. Would you swipe right?
Would you guys take her to the park to show your friends too? And well, I just want to end off by thanking CNN News for the article Man Found Carrying Mummy in a Food Delivery Bag in Peru, written by Claudia Rebasa and Tara John on February 28th, 2023. And I would also like to thank NBC News for the article Man Found Carrying Around a Mummified Corpse Up to 800 Years Old in a Food Delivery Bag in Peru, written by Patrick Smith and Sarah Maidley, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, written on March 1st, 2023. So, yeah, everybody, you cannot say we did not deliver this episode. We had all kinds of things here for you guys, a lot of firsts. We even had our first mummy on this on our show. So, I mean, hey, I don't know if that doesn't deserve 5-star ratings and reviews. I don't know what does. If you guys want to submit your own stories or show us any, news like this, be sure to email us at calaveriapod@gmail.com. If you guys want to see any of the pictures that accompany our episodes or our TikToks that we mention at the end of every episode, be sure to follow us at calaveriapod and also follow us on TikTok and Twitter at calaveriapod as well.
Be sure to leave us a 5-star rating or review. And if you're listening on an app that doesn't let you rate or review us, email us or comment on our Instagram. We love seeing your guys' feedback. We love getting any kind of feedback.
Recently, we had a new follower mention on Instagram that they found us on Spotify and that they really loved our content. So shout out to that follower. I don't know your name. I don't want to put your handle on blast. So just, you know who you are. Shout out to you. And if you guys know anybody that is interested in the genre, be sure to share it with them, your friends or family. And hey, if they have a story, share it with us. It doesn't have to be your own. And well, if there's nothing else, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Bye.